pray. God of compassion, thank you for another day, this holy season of Lent. As we survey the wondrous cross on which the Prince of Glory died, love so amazing, so divine, demands my soul, my life, my all. Bless the members of Parliament and all assist their work as representatives of the people. We begin with prayer to acknowledge our dependence on you as our Creator, Redeemer, and Sustainer. By the sacrifice of Jesus, teach us how to give. By the toils of Jesus, teach us how to work. By the cross of Jesus, teach us how you love. By the prayer of Jesus, teach us how to pray to you. As we say, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us into the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
This House is now in session. Minutes for the meeting held on Friday, March 5th, 2021, to be deferred.
Leader? Motion for deferred.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the minutes of that particular meeting be deferred.
Questions that the aforementioned minutes be deferred. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. The aforementioned minutes are hereby deferred.
Announcements by Your Honor, the Speaker. Messages from Her Excellency, the Governor General. Petitions, papers, government notices. Yes, notice. Notice, give notice.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice of a resolution to grant the sum of $17,655,386 from the Consolidated Fund and to place it at the disposal of the government to supplement the estimates for the year 2020 to 2021, as shown in the supplementary estimates number 10 of 2020-21.
Private members' notices, notices of questions, reports from select committees, first readings of those.
Honorable Member for St. Joseph.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the first reading of the Liquor Licenses Bill 2021.
Questions that the aforementioned bill be read a first time. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Meeting, the ayes have it.
Statements by ministers, congratulatory and/or obituary speeches, personal explanations, motions for leave of absence, or replies to questions, notices of motion for the adjournment of the House on matters of urgent public importance, orders of the day.
Honorable Member for St. Joseph.
Six, 16, 18, 20, 42, 5, 43, and 44 for the remainder of the day's sitting.
Questions that the aforementioned standing orders be suspended for the remainder of the day's sitting. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Meeting, the ayes have it. The aforementioned standing orders are hereby suspended for the remainder of the day's sitting.
Government business, sir.
Government business is the order of the day.
Order number 1, in the name of the Honorable Attorney General and Minister of Legal Affairs, to move the second reading of the Anti-Corruption and Anti-2020.
Honorable Member for St. Joseph.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this bill has been with us for quite a few weeks, and I hope that members have had the opportunity or have taken the opportunity to go through it. It is not intended, Mr. Speaker, that this morning's presentation and the course of this debate would be a wide-ranging debate on corruption in Barbados. This bill seeks to set the institutional framework that we need to put in place to combat it. We have already had several debates on the matter of corruption, and I assure the Chamber that very shortly that opportunity will again arise. And perhaps that would be a good place to start, to take stock of where we are. Regrettably, Mr. Speaker, we have now to bring back to Parliament the bill to deal with integrity legislation. You will recall, sir, that that bill was not passed in the Senate shortly before Parliament was prorogued last year. The senators then had some concerns, and we have taken the opportunity to try to find a mechanism to deal with some of those concerns in a way that is open and that represents the highest traditions of any parliament. That is, that a government should never be embarrassed to take counsel from people on views that may vary slightly from ours. The intent is to get to the same place, but it is in the highest tradition of democracy, sir, that, as the Americans say, you reach across the aisle sometimes to see how you can improve an instrument. I anticipate that that particular bill should be back before this chamber, certainly April, or, yeah, I'm anticipating April, but possibly as far down as May. Part of that suite of legislation, the chamber would recollect, I've said that there's a suite of legislation that's coming. There is the whistleblower legislation that has been drafted and sent to Integrity Barbados for their consultation. They've had it for a few weeks, and they sent back to me not long ago their comments on the whistleblower legislation. You remember that in any regime dealing with corruption, you want to be able to protect an individual who comes forward, because very often the challenge is that nobody is willing to step forward to say, this is what's happening, that's what's happening. So the whistleblower legislation is an integral part of that suite of anti-corruption instruments, and as I said, Integrity Barbados, the Barbados watchdog on corruption matters, they've been able to weigh in on it and give me and our drafts people some very important commentary, and that is now being refined. So that too will come back to the chamber in short order. We have to have an anti-corruption bill. The one that we had prepared died in the last parliament. And we are taking this opportunity to tweak that as well. That has also been sent to Integrity Barbados for their comment. We are insisting on following a model of full consultation on these things. And their comments came back to me only 2 weeks ago, a week and a half ago. And we are working to incorporate as many of those comments as we can, but that is to be completed in fairly short order. So that if Parliament takes an Easter recess, I know some of us are hoping that it does. If Parliament takes an Easter recess, hopefully by the time we come back from Easter, I'll be able to present the chamber with the full suite of legislation which will round out the statutory and legal framework for dealing with the issue of corruption. But what we're here dealing with today, Mr. Speaker, is not the framework to deal with corruption, but the institutional framework which really has to come in advance. And therefore, rather than holding this back until we bring those other instruments, we felt it was important to get this agency up and running so that when the legislation comes, then we would already have the agency there. It makes no sense, Mr. Speaker, to enact the legislation and then put an agency in place. It is the counsel of prudence, sir, to have the agency in place, have the institutional framework and arrangements settled so that once the legislation, the substantive rules of the game are put in place, we have a team, a cadre of officers who are ready to work. Now, Mr. Speaker, you may ask the question, why are we setting up an anti-corruption agency? Surely we have the Royal Barbados Police Force, and they're the police of the country, and they deal with law and order. And therefore, an argument could be advanced that we really don't need a separate agency. The challenge is, Mr. Speaker, and it's a very practical one. The members of the Royal Barbados Police Force are divided into various units, and the Financial Crime Investigation Unit is one of the smaller units in the force. Officers work hard, they work very hard, but as a part of a police force, and COVID is perhaps a good example, sir. The police force is a unitary institution. So if there's a shortfall here, we can't say, well, this particular unit down, as happened in instances during COVID. We have to make sure it is manned, so we have to move officers from place A to supplement place B. So if there's a particular shortage of manpower, we have to pull officers from the Financial Crimes Investigation Unit and put them in other places to supplement that manpower. Now just imagine what that will do to an investigation that is at a sensitive stage. It can present significant difficulty. The size of the unit is also another issue. But when we look at what we have, we recognize that in order to be able to do some of the careful analysis that is required in order to deal with corruption, very often you need to buy in services. And with the structure of our force, buying in services to conduct investigations is something that doesn't work within the way our force is set up and run. We know that issues of corruption require an eye to detail, and it also requires, in many instances, the application of skill sets that are not readily available, sometimes, very often, not even readily available in Barbados. I believe that I've said to this chamber before that in Trinidad, after their last election, well, not their last one, the one before, the Keith Rowley administration brought in 30 individuals from the UK and other parts of the world, swore in all of them as police constables, and got them to work on investigating corruption issues. Now, that was their strategy. But the point I'm making is that they had to reach beyond their shores to find the specialist people that it would take to adequately and thoroughly investigate corruption. Now, the fact is, Mr. Speaker, these are not criticisms of our own force. It is a recognition of challenges that, as a small country, we face in every single arena. In the fighting of COVID, we've had to rely heavily on the expertise of PAHO and the WHO in order to supplement our homegrown resources, which are expert. They're expert. But it often happens that you need to reach out to get some hands to help you to carry the burden. But then you also need to reach out sometimes when you recognize we don't have that expertise. We don't have it. So rather than limp alongside, you know, one of the most, and I'm sure you've seen it, sir, one of the most tragic things is when a person who doesn't have the expertise decides he can try and do it. And in our legal profession, we see it sometimes. Mr. Speaker, if you were to put me in a criminal court, no matter how much QC I am, you know, there's a story about a famous politician of an era past in Barbados. They said that if he was a lawyer, and they said that if you ever ran into problems, don't go to him, because apparently a man's bicycle was stolen, and by the time the case was finished, the man who the bicycle belonged to was who get locked up. So I recognize my shortcomings, and I would not try to venture into your areas. But while I may be being facetious, the point I want to make is that when we have areas where we do not have expertise, we need to put the institutional arrangements in place so that that expertise can be brought in. And the good thing about when you buy in the expertise, Mr. Speaker, certainly in this structure, there is an opportunity. In fact, it is more than an opportunity, there's an imperative that you work alongside local people so that that expertise is transferred and built up. Able to adequately deal with the issue of corruption, we needed to move beyond the operation of the Royal Barbados Police Force and establish a dedicated agency that goes to work every single day to deal with these issues. It's vital, sir. You know, Mr. Speaker, countries are ranked on various indices for all kinds of things, health and communications and education and so on, transparency, and there's a corruption index. And Barbados is on that corruption index, and we're probably in the top 10 in the Americas, but we've made no significant strides in the last decade. In fact, if you ask me, if anything, we were striding backwards. And part of the reason that we've not been able to make any strides on that particular index, so even though we rank probably top of the Caribbean, is because all that we have had is a Royal Barbados Police Force struggling to deal with everything that it has to struggle to deal with, and with a 1929 piece of legislation. No, I mean, it's a wonder we were anywhere at all. Mr. Speaker, what we are looking to set up is a standalone, dedicated agency that investigates corruption and terrorism issues. Now, again, I say that these are issues that are currently within the purview of the Royal Barbados Police Force. And sir, it is not the intention of this agency to remove those things from the Royal Barbados Police Force at all. In fact, it is anticipated that in many areas, this agency will work very closely with all of our existing institutions. So that this bill talks about working with strategic partners. And those strategic partners include the Commissioner of Police, the Revenue Commissioner, Comptroller of Customs, Chief Immigration Officer, Director of the Financial Intelligence Unit, Chairman of the Integrity Commission, Registrar of the Supreme Court, the Superintendent of Prisons, the DPP, and the Chief of Staff of the Barbados Defense Force. Now that should give you a signal, Mr. Speaker, that these strategic partners, all of whom will operate in a particular sphere of government, of governmental activity, will be working with this central unit so as to be able to ferret out and prosecute corruption. You know, Mr. Speaker, it's you know, we have an idea of a police investigation to go and knock on a door and grab somebody, and next thing you know, they're before the courts and you know, a trial and a sentence or something like that. The one thing that we have to recognize, sir, is that people who are engaged in corruption are very sophisticated. They often don't leave fingerprints. You have to follow the money, and following the money requires court orders, because you can't just show up at the bank and say, let me see so-and-so bank account, how much money he got. And it doesn't work like that. And knowing how much is in it doesn't help you an awful lot unless you can trace where it came from. And corruption is intensified in terms of its intent on being hidden when foreign accounts are used. So these strategic partners are all going to be contributors to the exercise of any investigation. So it is not intended to stop the police force from doing its own investigations on corruption. It is not intended to stop the police force from continuing its good work in the area of terrorism. But we have, as a government, to provide additional resources, to give things the additional focus that they need, so that at the end of the day, we get a better product. Now, part of these arrangements, Mr. Speaker, because I am anticipating that somebody will say, hey, you know, there's another government agency that you're setting up to be controlled by the politicians. And so they're going to be friends and family and so on. And I want to urge those people who might begin with that statement, who might begin with that idea, to look very carefully at the arrangements within this agency, sir. Because it is to be headed by a Director General, and that Director General, Mr. Speaker, is only capable of being removed from office for inability to discharge the functions of the office, whether arising from infirmity of body or mind, for incompetence, for misconduct, if he becomes bankrupt, if he is convicted of any offense involving dishonesty or moral turpitude, or if he fails without reasonable excuse to carry out a function imposed by the Act, or breaches his contract. No, sir. The Director General, who will administer this agency, is appointed by the Governor General by instrument in writing on the recommendation of the Prime Minister after consultation with the Leader of the Opposition, and he shall be appointed for a period of 3 years and shall be eligible for reappointment. So what do we have? The appointment made by the Governor General on the advice of the Prime Minister after consultation with the Leader of the Opposition. It shall be an appointment for 3 years, and the person shall be eligible for reappointment. So what this does is it essentially binds the Crown to the Director General and binds the Director General to the Crown for a period of 3 years, and during that 3-year period, he or she can only be removed from office for these limited purposes, for these limited reasons. So if you fall out with the government, too bad. We don't get to remove you. If you're looking into someone in the government's personal business, too bad. We don't get to remove you. This office is not established in the Constitution. It is a new office. But we have taken care, sir, we have taken care to provide the kind of protection for a public servant that the Constitution provides for people like the DPP and judges and the Auditor General and so on. Those offices are considered to be so important and inviolate that they have constitutional protection where you can only remove them for misconduct. So in this instance, essentially, you would have to find that the Director General was guilty of misconduct in order to be able to remove him. So you can't suspend him because you don't like what he do. You can't remove him from office because you don't like what he's doing. Now, there are some people who believe that government should have free rein in everything, but the fact is a responsible administration has to understand that accountability is paramount. And sometimes to ensure that accountability, you in fact have to hobble your own action and your own ability to act. And I'm not afraid of us attributing and giving and bestowing this particular officer, whoever that person may be, with a protection, a security of tenure that approximates that of other individuals. It's not the same thing because we are giving the person a contract. Part of the challenges of governance, one of the big challenges of governance is always leadership. It's always leadership. And there is the possibility that the person who is chosen may not quite work out. Happens every day. Happens every day. And while it might be convenient to pivot and say, well, thank you, we should part ways, we had to recognize that, in order to be able to do that, we would really be making this person excessively beholden to an administration. And therefore, you wouldn't have the kind of transparency and independent action that we want to see happen. And therefore, this security for at least 3 years of the Director General is important. Now, sir, we don't reinvent the wheel if we don't have to. And as we look to this agency, try to see how it would work, we drew extensively on the Jamaican experience, because the Jamaican experience, they have a major organized crime agency that is established in Jamaica that works independently of their Jamaican constabulary, but in a collaborative way. And the responsibility of that agency is to investigate major organized crime in Jamaica. And they have similarly imbued their Director General, or their CEO, I don't know what they call him, with the clothing of protection from being sent on his way. And we've drawn from the Jamaican experience, and we feel that that is a model that we can usefully adapt for Barbados. What is the function of the agency? Mr. Speaker, the function of the agency is essentially, let me refer to it specifically. The agency may investigate any corruption or terrorism or any suspected offense which appears to the agency on reasonable grounds to involve corruption or terrorism or to relate thereto. So it's not just that it must be an act of corruption. It can also be an instance where there's something that involves corruption as one of its elements or that relates to corruption. And this happens where the Director General is of the view that the crime is either transnational in nature. We know that corruption now is cross-border, just like trade. Or if it poses a significant threat to national security or public safety, or that there's good reason to do so for the purpose of investigating the affairs or any aspect of the affairs of any person. One of the powers of the Director General will be to require the person under investigation to produce at such place as may be specified any specified documents or any documents of a specified description which appear to the Director General to relate to any matter relevant to investigation. Now, sir, let me say this is an important power, and it is so important, sir. I've told this chamber before that we have an ongoing relationship with a team of experts who have been assisting us in terms of corruption investigations and who are due to come back to Barbados very shortly, but the shutdown in the UK and so on has caused that to be deferred. This particular power, sir, was so important. It was missing in our first draft. And our consultants sat around the table with us and they said, well, you know, part of investigating corruption offenses in England was the role that the power to demand documentation played. Let me tell you what my experience as Attorney General has been over the last 3 years. We have sought to get documentation from individuals. And they've refused. They've refused. Now, these are individuals who have said to me, we want to cooperate with you. We want to cooperate with you. But they've refused. And we have no easy power other than a search warrant. And search warrants only issued in particular circumstances. So at this level, we have no way of accessing vital information. So this power, which is used quite extensively in England by their authorities, allows the individual investigating the corruption to demand from anybody, and when I say anybody, I don't mean they can't come and demand people who are not connected, but in the course of an investigation, they are entitled to demand from the individual, a person under investigation, to produce documents. And if they don't produce the documents, then consequences will follow. You see, sir, there are, happily for us today, a lot of stuff is stored electronically. And these documents will also relate to electronic records. And the access to that information is vital. So this will allow the Director General to demand from a company, I want to see your accounting records. Let me see your bank statements. I want to see how the money was moving. And the $200,000 cash withdrawal that you make, we want to know what you do with it. Or maybe you took in $200,000 in cash, but didn't deposit it because we don't see any trace of any deposit. So where did it go? What did you do? So this ability to be able to demand records, our consultants in the UK said, it is vital that you have this power vested in the Director General if he or she is going to be effective in terms of carrying out investigations. And so we have incorporated that power here. Now, that is not to say that the power to get for search warrants and so on is not important, and that is preserved here as well. But this ability to demand documentation, you see, when you demand documentation, the person has to provide it. But if you have to execute a search warrant, then you have to go and search for it. And there's a big difference. There's a big difference because the search warrant, he can stand up and fold his hands. I believe the speaker would attest to that. A search warrant allows you to search. So you could come and search all you like. If you don't find it, that's your problem. Because that's what a search warrant is. It is a warrant allowing the authorities to search. So more often than not, when the authorities are searching, they tell you you're going to sit down there. You're going to sit down someplace. You go outside, we searching. You don't get anywhere. But that by its nature is not an effective tool in terms of what we're trying to achieve here. Because when a forensic specialist comes in to do a forensic analysis of a company's books, I mean, to try and execute a search warrant, to come to seize the books, it's really, it's not what we want. It's not what you need. What you need is to be able to say, I want to see all, and you list off your documents. I want to see your bank statements. I want to see your deposit slips. I want to see your withdrawal slips. I want to see your financial statements. I want to see everything. And you demand it. And if it doesn't come, then you can go after it. But one operates on the basis of specified documentation, while a search warrant is more like a scattershot approach. And in the case of corruption, sir, we would avoid the scattershot approach if we can. In this bill, we provide that the Proceeds and Instrumentalities of Crime Act of 2019, one of the early pivotal pieces of legislation that we passed, will apply to this act. And let me tell you the significance of it. It bears repeating, Mr. Speaker. You see, there are people engaged in corrupt practices who have to find a way to do something with the money. And they will sometimes put it in a car, put it in a house, a whole set of stuff. The Proceeds and Instrumentalities of Crime Act allows the authorities to reach back into your affairs for 20 years and try to discover whether there are any assets for which you have no proper explanation. And if you have no proper explanation, then it allows, and the burden of proof is on you, it allows, and we talked about this when we passed this bill 2 years ago, it allows the state to seize those particular assets simply because you can't tell us where it came from. You can't point to any inheritance. All of a sudden you earning $2,000 a month and you got a big house someplace that you get last year. How you get it? Where were the savings to do that? You don't qualify for a mortgage, so where you found the purchase price? Okay? Those kinds of transactions are part and parcel of corrupt acts, and therefore the agency will be able to rely on the Proceeds and Instrumentalities of Crime Act in order to be able to effectively provide a remedy. I spoke earlier about the strategic partners in Section 11 of this bill. It says, a law enforcement agency in Barbados shall take reasonable steps to cooperate with the agency in the exercise of its functions. So this is mandating any law enforcement agency. We're talking essentially about the police, but in a sense, customs, revenue commissioner through the BRA, all of those people, all of our strategic partners are expected to cooperate collaboratively with the agency and provide such assistance as it may. But it also works the other way around. Because the police force or the revenue commission or the control of customs may have some idea that there's some corrupt practice going on. The police may actually be involved in a substantive investigation. And if not the police, the BRA may maybe have a view that there's something happening that needs to be looked at, or the Comptroller of Customs. Those agencies are empowered under this particular clause, Clause 11.2, to seek the assistance of the Specialized Anti-Corruption Agency. So it's a two-way street. You see, in a situation where the Royal Barbados Police Force may be trying to deal with a very complex financial crime, maybe trying to deal with a very complex matter involving corruption. But it only has such limit, it only has so many resources. It does its investigations through its police officers. That unit now consists of only 6 people. Only 6 people. For such an important agency. Highly trained, yes, but still only 6. And they're dealing with all the financial crimes, because corruption is just one of many financial crimes. All of the financial crimes, fraud and all those kinds of things, embezzlement, all those things that the agency has to deal with, corruption is one part of it. And so perhaps we begin to see why we need a specialized agency. And therefore, in a situation where the police force, for example, says, well, look, we have an investigation, looks like it's going to be corruption. Can you assist us with it? Then this provision at 11.2 and 11.3 it is, allows for an agency like the police force to seek out the assistance of the anti-corruption unit to be able to come and lend those services. Now, the important thing too has to do with your ability to contract for professional services, because the unit is intended to be staffed by very few people. We're not going to be hiring 20 people, 30 people. The idea is that this unit will be a small, tight, highly skilled unit, but that it will, when it needs forensic services, we don't want a unit with 4 accountants in it. We want the unit to say, we need to find accountants who can look into particular kinds of matters, and these are the people that we're going to engage. If it's a different kind of thing, they'll engage those people. So this unit will be able to buy in those resources to assist in investigations. It will give those people who are coming in to do investigations statutory power by virtue of being engaged by the unit in a way that the Royal Barbados Police Force or the Revenue Commission or the Comptroller of Customs will not be able to do. So this will bring tremendous flexibility to what they have to do. Now, sir, let me talk about accountability, because accountability is very important. In this agency, and it's a body corporate, sir, it will be a body corporate, the Director General has to make sure that he submits a plan at the start of every financial year, setting out exactly how the agency is going to be discharging its duties during that financial year. Now, in a way, this accords with the arrangements under the financial, which statute is it? Public finance. Where agencies now have to do this kind of work. But in this instance, it's not a purely accounting function. It's important for the agency to be able to say, this is exactly how we're going to do what we want to do this year. These are our strategic priorities. This is how we need to operate. This is what we're going to publish so that the adequate budgetary arrangements can be made. But I mentioned accountability, and it is in that regard, sir, that this act pays special attention to the workings of the body. Under this bill, an oversight committee is established. And the objectives of this committee are to hold the Director General and other officers of the agency accountable to the public, sir, not accountable to the Barbados Labour Party, not accountable to the administration, accountable to the public in the performance of their functions under this act. That's the first objective of the committee. And secondly, to provide independent oversight in relation to the handling of complaints made by any individual. You see, sir, as long as you have an agency that's doing this kind of thing, there's always going to be somebody who will say, these people are falling short of a reasonable standard. They've abused my operation. They've come in and they've taken documents, and next thing you know, my documents all over the internet. My proprietary knowledge is no longer available to me alone. They've disclosed information to my competitors, all those kinds. There are any number of kinds of complaints that can come in, and therefore the oversight is important. But it is also important, sir, because anytime you establish a body like this, there's going to be the perception that this is going, not a watchdog, but that is going to be a bulldog that any administration will sick on somebody that don't like. That's a reality. There will be a perception that this statutory instrument, this institutional framework, will be available to be used by the political directorate to go after A or go after B or go after C. And therefore, it is important to us, as the administration advancing this bill, that we establish an oversight committee which is going to be able to deal with those matters. Now let me tell you about the oversight committee, sir. Oversight committee is to be found in the third schedule of the bill. And it says, the Governor General shall, on the recommendation of the Prime Minister, after consulting with the Leader of the Opposition, appoint 7 persons to be members of the committee. The members of the committee shall be appointed by instrument in writing and shall comprise 1, a retired judge of the High Court. 2, a retired officer of the Royal Barbados Police Force not below the rank of Assistant Commissioner of Police. 3, a retired officer of the BDF, Barbados Defense Force, not below the rank of Colonel. And the Minister of Religion, each of whom shall hold office for a term of 5 years. And then it will also be constituted by 3 other members recommended by the minister responsible for defense and security from persons with expertise in the following areas: financial matters, anti-corruption matters, and public procurement matters, each of whom shall hold office for a period of 3 years. So, and in this committee, the Governor General appoints the chairman in this case, her own discretion. So the chairman isn't appointed by the minister or on the advice of the minister. The chairman is appointed by the Governor General in his or her own discretion. And the reason why it's staggered, some 5 years, some 3 years, is to ensure that there's always some continuity in terms of the oversight committee. Mr. Speaker, this really represents a new arsenal in our toolbox. Sorry, it represents a new tool in our arsenal. And it is intended, Mr. Speaker, to fill a breach that I believe the public of Barbados recognizing has long been there. Corruption is something that is, I could say, like a thief in the night, I suppose, but I'm really trying to conjure up an image of a crime that happened in the dark almost, behind closed doors. And the parties are bound by a code which causes the one to keep quiet about the other, because if I disclose a corrupt act, then there's a good chance, unless I'm a whistleblower, that I was involved in it too. So because corruption takes two or more parties, everybody who's a party to it is as guilty, and there is no innocent party in corrupt dealings. The corruptor is guilty, the corruptee is guilty, the people who receive down the line. Because sometimes it gets that complicated. A person will accept a payment, and then that payment has to then be used to corrupt other people in the chain. So they're all guilty. And these things don't happen by way of check. They don't happen in the open. Don't happen on Broad Street or Swan Street. They happen in secret and in secret places. And therefore, if we intend to be serious about the matter, if we are going to be serious about the matter of corruption, we have not just to pass legislation, but to provide proper tools for its enforcement. We are bringing a new anti-corruption bill with a higher level of penalties and greater force of law. We are bringing the integrity legislation. We are bringing the whistleblower legislation. We already have the remediation agreements, which allows people to almost confess and avoid. But none of these things will mean anything if we have to rely on the existing institutional structures to be able to do the investigation, the policing, and the eventual prosecution. I am satisfied, Mr. Speaker, that this agency will have that legal footing to be able to allow it to do so. It will see experts being pressed into the fight. It will see services of outside experts being engaged to help us where we don't have that expertise. And it will, as long as it is here, sir, it will present itself as a strong deterrent, because you don't have to, anybody who think, man, when they get around to me, worry about them, they're going to investigate this in 10 years. The police too busy, all kind of thing. Not so with this agency, sir. This is going to be a specialized, cutting-edge agency, properly funded. We are engaged in we are going to be laying the estimates for the year 2021, 22 later today, and there is funding in it for this agency to make sure that it is properly staffed. And let me tell you this now, sir. Every single person that is going to be hired to work in this agency must be polygraphed and must pass the polygraph test. And across CARICOM, and I probably should just stop and sit down. Across CARICOM, we're trying to put a regime in place where varying levels of authority and responsibility require varying levels of due diligence. And the members of the Royal Barbados Police Force are frequently polygraphed. And the people in this agency, the people who are hired in this agency to work, will have to be polygraphed, sir. Even if you consider the RSS, the Regional Security System, down to the maid at the Regional Security System is polygraphed. You don't get through those doors to work unless you've passed the polygraph test. And you are polygraphed periodically. It's not the case that you polygraph it. It's not like common entrance. You do it once and never got to do it again. It is that you are subject to rigorous background checks and due diligence on a continuous basis so that we can be satisfied, so that the public, the people, the oversight committee can be satisfied that the people who are working in it are scrupulously honest and devoted to duty, not devoted to party, not devoted to anybody, devoted to duty. Mr. Speaker, I commend this piece of legislation to the Chamber. I am sure that once we get it up and running, it will then be an easy transition to the enforcement of the legislative regime that we have. But it will also be an agency that is accountable through the Oversight Committee, and where the highest standards of honesty and probity are going to be required and insisted on among all of its staff. So I don't know that there's anything more that I would want to add at this point. So let me thank you for your patience. Let me thank the Chamber for its indulgence. And I beg to move that this bill be read a second time.
You need to put on your mic, ma'am. I remember you need to put on your mic. I remember saying GM South.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I had hesitated because I thought the honourable member for St. Michael West would have wanted to share significantly on this, but perhaps he'll be coming later. And I just want to start by thanking the honourable member for St. Joseph, our Attorney General, for an excellent presentation on the function and purpose of this particular unit for Barbados, and to help Barbadians to be able to safeguard the space in which we live and in which we operate. The Attorney General outlined for us the purpose for this agency, why it is that we need it, what is the rationale, its purpose, what it will do. He shared with this honourable chamber what are the protections that have been put in place to manage the independence of the persons who will be selected to work with this agency. And he shared with us about the functions, how it will work in association with other agencies as part of an overall network that will help protect the integrity of Barbados. And sir, I felt completely reassured. I felt reassured because I felt that the necessary time and effort and thought went in, driven by a philosophy of our administration, which is the betterment of our people is at the center of everything that we do. And therefore I was considerably heartened by his also taking the opportunity to share what are some of the other pieces of legislation that will be coming to this chamber, the other actions that would be taken that would allow us to be able to grapple with the issues of integrity in public life, dealing with issues of corruption, dealing with issues of supporting terrorism, either deliberately or without really recognizing what is happening, because we're going to have a watchdog unit that will be able to police what is going on within our borders. Now, this has become very necessary because not only do we need to protect the space in which Barbadians do business, and I will speak on that a little later, but we also have to be able to honor the requirements and obligations that are demanded of us as we engage the wider global space. Because there's been an acceleration of globalization and economic integration, it has made it absolutely necessary that in order to protect trade, in order to protect the financial system, it is necessary that countries agree to a certain set of actions, a certain set of standards, and demonstrate their capacity to be able to regulate, monitor, and enforce all that is required of us when we engage with international agencies. So whether it is what occurs under the Ministry of International Business, dealing with the issues of our blacklisting and tax havens, etc., or what the Attorney General himself deals with in terms of the Financial Action Task Force, all of these things are things that demand of us that we demonstrate at every turn that we are managing and monitoring our space and can give others the assurance outside of our shores that to do business with Barbados is a good thing because we are managing our affairs with integrity. And in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, our work also touches somewhat on this area as well. Because as we engage various organizations, whether it is doing a post-Cotonou agreement with the ACP, whether or not we're dealing with something that impacts with the EU or the Commonwealth or at the WTO, if you're looking at investment facilitation and so on, this issue of what safeguards do you have in place to be able to safeguard the proper functioning of trade, the proper functioning of investment, to make sure that you stamp out corruption. These things now become part of the international space and is demanded of us to demonstrate that we are taking care of business. And what this does, Mr. Speaker, it builds the reputation of Barbados as a place in which you can do business. It gives assurances to people who want to invest in our shores. Mr. Speaker, our MPs in this chamber, those who have responsibility for various ministries, spend a great deal of time planning for how we're going to attract investment, planning for how we are going to provide jobs for people, planning for how we're going to take care of the security of people's property, the security of their person, and to ensure that fairness and justice exists in the land. And all of that would come to naught if we did not have, as part of our arsenal, this unit to help us deal with corruption and terrorism. And therefore, it's for this reason that we strongly welcome it. Now, sir, I was looking at this progression that has been going on in world affairs, because in times past, the many demands that are being put on nations, big and small alike, SIDS, small island developing states, developing countries, countries that are struggling right now to be able to keep their economies going, there has been a growing and intense pressure to make all nations conform to certain standards, conform to certain patterns of conduct. And this has come at a tremendous cost to those nations. Because the truth be told, while dealing with corruption is important, while ensuring you're meeting your international obligations are important, nations with limited resources struggle because often the money that is needed for other things, you are forced not on your own timetable, but on somebody else's timetable to push resources in a direction to meet an obligation, to meet a time frame set by someone else. And I have to congratulate the Honourable Member for St. Joseph, because when we came into office, Mr. Speaker, hardly anything was in place to help us meet our obligations to be able to operate in the international business arena. Things were in dreadful disarray. We were being blacklisted left, right, and center. We were coming under censure left, right, and center. So many things that were needed to be done to ensure that Barbados could hold its place internationally and demonstrate by what it puts on the ground that it was ready for business. It was a place you could trust to do business because justice works in the nation. Those things were sadly lacking and sadly absent. And I have to say, Mr. Speaker, that one of the things that used to pass through my mind when I looked at all the things that were undone and all the things that were done incorrectly, you used to wonder what they came to work to do every day, the past administration, because so much was not in place, and there were things that could have been done. There are things that should have taken priority. And so a great deal of work has been ongoing in this administration to put a number of those things right. And what that does for us, it enables us, when we are engaging the international arena, to be able to put our hand up and say, yes, Barbados has been able to put this in place. Yes, we have this type of legislation existing. Yes, we've put in place a monitoring unit that would allow us to be able to enforce the things which we have put as standards for our conduct. But in looking at the progression, one of the things that was interesting for me was one writer who opined that during the period of the Cold War, this kind of close attention to corruption, putting in legislation against corruption in foreign places by your domestic enterprises, none of these things were important 30, 40 years ago. There wasn't that same emphasis. And he explained that developed countries at that time turned a blind eye to things that were happening in developing countries because their interest was in keeping us on their side, and so that we don't shift from capitalism, from democracy, over to the Russian side, where we would engage communism. And therefore, when they made resources available to us, the high level of accountability that you find today was not as strictly enforced or asked for, because they did not wish to antagonize us, to cause us to shift where our allegiance and alliance would be. And this would have some impact when we go to multilateral organizations, and votes were important, etc. So we were pawns in a particular game. However, by so allowing that across the world in general, people in the developed world developed a notion that many developing countries were corrupt, badly managed, not able to take care of their own business, and that they needed to play the role of a father figure, an enforcer, etc. They have to measure us on all kinds of indexes to be able to say, what type of country do you have? But their first beginning point was, these small nations, these nations are going to be corrupt. And so that has an impact on the investors that exist within their countries. And hence, investors want to get the assurance that where I am going to put money to do business, that this is a place that I can safely do some business in. And therefore, would have required or requested of their governments to be able to provide the necessary analysis, provide the necessary assessments, that they can make a judgment call as to whether it was safe to be able to do business within these jurisdictions. I'll show you how it manifested itself at that time during the Cold War. You will remember that back in the 70s, 80s, early part of the 90s, you would have a situation, for example, like tourism. Because the world was divided between communism and capitalism, nations that mirror closely enough the model and practice of some developing countries were deemed as safe places for people to invest in hotels and for tourists to take the risk to come to have a holiday. That is how Barbados tourism actually grew, because Barbados was seen as a place that was safe to come for a holiday, and it was seen as a place that was safe in which to receive tourism investment. So that you did not get the same type of appetite, for example, putting hotels in the former Soviet Union. You did not get that same appetite for investment in Latin America, because many of them were seen as dictatorships, they were seen as communists, etc., unstable, and therefore people were not comfortable doing business there, and they would be seen as being corrupt. And so it narrowed the space in which people were willing to take money, go outside of their borders, and establish themselves. Even Asia, at that point in time, was seen as a place that did not have all the systems in place, weren't stable, and therefore you're likely to be at risk. And so Barbados was able, and the Caribbean, we were able to attract investment. There was a time when it was easy. People were coming to set up electronic firms, they were coming to set up X and set up Y, etc. And we could look forward during that period that every year we could see a number of companies come in to make investments, which would provide jobs for our people. But over the years, what would have happened is a lot of the dynamics in those countries that were unsafe changed. The relationship with communism changed. A number of countries recognizing that they needed to build a good life for their people, changed their posture, and sought to attract people from everywhere. So that we found that China became very attractive for investment. We found Latin America became attractive for investment. When I was in my teens, nobody knew about Uruguay as a place to go and holiday. Nobody thought of Chile as a place to go and do business. Those were kept for places that presented themselves as places that were well managed, places that were well regulated, that observed the principles and observed the norms that were similar to those in the capitalist developed world. So what is happening now, because there has been that shift, we have a situation where the global economy is so much more highly integrated that the issue of risk assumes greater importance now than ever before. And hence, the global demand by international organizations that countries have certain things in place, both in terms of legislation and organizations, to enforce that legislation to make things safe for business. And so this particular unit is going to be very helpful to Barbados, not just in terms of dealing with the issue of corruption or dealing with the issue of terrorism, but will make Barbados an even more attractive place for us to be able to get investment here in Barbados, and we definitely need it, sir. So what are the benefits that we can derive from the presence of such a unit? At the domestic level, a great deal. The first thing, Mr. Speaker, is that if we have a proper monitoring mechanism to deal with corruption wherever it is, it means that there will be better management of the resources of our people. Because wherever corruption has been allowed to run unchecked, economic development suffers. And studies have been done to make the correlation between the presence of corruption, its degree, the degree of hold it has on the systems of a country, and the well-being of citizens. Because those resources are better managed, they're better channeled into the things that are of great importance to the people. So whether it is roads, whether it's health care, whether it's the school system, regardless of what those services are, when you're able to keep corruption under control. I know the whole idea is to stamp it out, but I don't know if you can ever stamp out all. Because every time you block a hole, somebody may find another one to open up to get through. So the idea is to have a unit that is flexible and can move quickly to look and see where those new areas are and ensure that they're blocked. So citizens enjoy a better quality of life when we're able to deal with the issues of corruption. It also acts as a safeguard, as we shared earlier, for bona fide investors to feel comfortable to come and do business with us, and this provides jobs. Corruption also has an impact on the cost of living, especially if you get high levels of corruption in government, Mr. Speaker, the cost of living is going to go up for the citizen because more money has to be found, and it will be found through taxation and then pilfered off in varying ways, and this will affect the quality of life of our citizens. So dealing with corruption helps us to guarantee and control the cost of living and the quality of life. One of the potential disadvantages, however, and Barbados, I have to say I'm really proud of our country, I really am. I'm proud of our administration, I will tell you why. In whatever arena I represent Barbados or other members of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade represents Barbados, Barbados always wants to ensure that it complies with what is being asked of it, that it has honored what it was supposed to do in a specific time, that it has paid its fees to be a part of the organization, and that at all times it is doing what is expected of it to do. And so Barbados has an excellent reputation internationally for how it conducts its affairs, how it manages itself. And that has put us in very good stead here, that when we were going through our troubles or issues these past 2 years, we were able to communicate that this administration was an administration you can do business with. But one of the disadvantages that can occur coming from our eagerness to ensure that we do that which is right at all times can sometimes be over-regulation, over-inspection, too many obstacles and blockages to get simple things done, because an organization might be terrified that it will come under the censor and displeasure of one of the international organizations to which it must report. And sir, nothing explains that better than what is happening in terms of trying to open a bank account in Barbados. In an effort to make sure every T is crossed, every I is dotted, and I commend them for wanting to do that. Sometimes it takes so long to open an account. And sir, I remember one day I went to open one, and the young lady, following her training, asked me what I wanted for. Sir, my mouth dropped open. I wasn't quite sure what she meant. What do you mean? What do you want an account for? I wanted to put money. I have transactions. There's business that has to be transacted. Mr. Speaker, it was a challenge. It took close to 2 months, I believe, to get it open. Now, I appreciate they feel that you're a politically exposed person and therefore they want to do all the necessary checks and so on and so forth. But it took a significant number of weeks in order to get it organized. And so, while I welcome this attention to detail, because I know they have to, I welcome the monitoring, I welcome the regulation. I think one of the things that we have to do is sometimes just look to see if we're doing sufficient to achieve the objective, or if in our effort to demonstrate that we comply, we ask for more than is necessary and really impede the progress, impede the movement of the economy and people being able to transact their business. They're now asking you for 2 pieces of ID. They're asking you now for a bill. The bill is to have your name on it. If you don't have that, you can't open an account. It really is making it difficult to do business in Barbados. So I think that one of the things that we probably need to look at is to sit and have discussions with a number of agencies. Let's identify what is sufficient to meet the task of being able to spot corruption or transactions that don't quite meet muster, and put sufficient in to safeguard it without choking off the life of the average citizen just trying to do ordinary things in Barbados. So, Mr. Speaker, I just want to, again, commend the legislation. I'm very pleased that we're going to be able to have this unit. I'm always reminded of the fact that the scripture says, righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a reproach. And in my younger days, you used to feel that it was simply to meet the requirements that God would have of us as humans, but it's not. It really is about making life possible. That without righteousness, life is not possible. If we look at what is happening right now with people being able to trust a vaccine, it's because they can't trust that the righteous thing was done in relation to this vaccine. Righteousness makes life possible. And I welcome the unit and the persons who will be selected. And I know that we will try to get the very best persons to safeguard this very critical area of Barbadian life, that we can safeguard our future by building a good image abroad, sending the signal that we are a good place in which to do investments, a good place to come and live and retire, and that Barbadians have the assurance that their business is properly conducted and their rights and their property are properly secured, and that their government is running and managing their affairs in such a way as to do them good, which is the central focus of this administration, that people and their well-being and their prosperity and their security is at the center of all that we do. I'm obliged to you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for St. Peter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just for a few moments, I want to reflect a little bit on this matter of corruption and the impact of corruption on the development of a nation. This administration has, in the session preceding this one, I like to just call it session before the prorogation of Parliament, spoke to corruption legislation that would seek to root out corruption in our affairs as a country. And there was some discussion in the public domain about whether or not we were genuine in our approach to this matter of corruption, and if it is that we really wanted to exercise it from our landscape. The bill before us, Mr. Speaker, is in some regards testament to the reality that this government is interested in removing corruption and corrupt practices from our landscape. In recent times, the former honourable member for St. George North, the former honourable member, has been quoted on a couple of occasions as saying that you cannot legislate a culture. That statement is absolutely correct. And I'm also reflecting on the statement for the honourable member for St. Michael South Central last week in terms of what the focus of our educational system or our legal and judicial system has been over the years. This whole matter of keeping people walking straight and correcting as opposed to encouraging and developing. There are, though, some areas in society and in the life of a society where a government must say, and eventually a society must say, this is something we do not want. I agree with the perspective that even as we say definitively that this is something we do not want, we still have to approach the matter in a way that suggests we want to have people realize why it is that this particular thing is not acceptable. Why is it so damaging? Why is it so dangerous for a society? And I think a lot of that will take place, must take place, has to take place within the context of educating ourselves. We have to share with people the damage that is caused. And the damage, Mr. Speaker, goes way beyond what may happen to a person's reputation. Because often when we speak to corruption and the damage that is caused, we get to the position pretty quickly about somebody who is being caught. And then their reputation has been tarnished. Their relatives, their children, their friends then become the targets of comments. A kind of a response that suggests that the negative is in being caught. I want to posit, Mr. Speaker, that the negative in corruption goes way beyond that. As a matter of fact, the negative in corruption is much more fundamental to development than the impact on a person's reputation, or sometimes people use the word character. But that impact, as far as I'm concerned, is very, very secondary. There are significant impacts on a country and on the country's development if matters like corruption are not addressed frontally, addressed clearly, and in many cases addressed forcefully. The legislation, the bill that is before us today, as the Learned Attorney General pointed out earlier, is a step in a process. And the reason why I say that it is prudent that we speak to this matter on an ongoing basis is because sometimes part of what turns off the public is that there is the expectation, very often, that something would be done and that instantly corruption would be addressed and gotten rid of, deleted, to use a tech term, from our landscape. That is not the reality. There is no silver bullet that gets corruption out of a system or out of a society. There's no silver bullet that will get corruption out of the Barbadian landscape. It is a process. And so there are pieces of legislation that need to be put in place to make sure that we take one step after the other. But what I can say to the people of Barbados is that this government has, like Stephen Covey said some years ago, we have the end in mind. And everything that we're doing in terms of structures and the legislation that underpins those structures is for a desired outcome. That outcome is the same outcome that the public has. We do not want corruption to exist in our society. This particular piece speaks to the setting up of the Anti-Corruption and Anti-Terrorism Agency. Mr. Speaker, my training makes me loath to the setting up of new bodies. I have always, well, no, I shouldn't say always. For quite a while, I've disliked the idea of what I term, and what others sometimes term, throwing people at problems. That has often been maybe the easy action, often a costly action, but if it is an action that is not grounded in a philosophy and does not have a method to it, then it becomes a waste of time. In this situation, it is absolutely necessary that we have a focus on the matter of rooting out corruption from this society. And that focus, and I think the Attorney General, the Honourable Member for St. Joseph, spoke to it. Somebody has to come to work to address this matter. Somebody has to be focused on making sure that people do not abuse the systems that have been put in place to engender growth and development in the country and use them for nefarious purposes. Somebody has to be focused on that matter and has to remain focused on that matter. There's a cost to setting up a structure like this. And this government has always been very, very open and transparent and will continue to be with the people of Barbados. There is going to be a cost to this structure. I say to the people of this country, those from St. Peter and those from all across Barbados, that as a representative of the people, I've been asked to make assessments on matters like these and share opinions and present perspectives. In my opinion, Mr. Speaker, while I recognize that there is a cost to setting up the structure, I also recognize that the endemic nature of corruption and its impact, its negative impact on a country and on that country's development is so large that it merits the cost of putting systems in place to address the matter. The Honourable Member for St. James South spoke to one of those costs, increased prices for the average consumer. I also add to that and build on that, Mr. Speaker, to say that resources used in corrupt activities are resources that could be better spent on areas of national development. Healthcare, education, welfare activities, activities that governments would get involved in, activities that third sector organizations, civil society organizations would ordinarily get involved in. But if funds are diverted to corrupt uses, then those funds are not available for these very legitimate developmental activities. And so that becomes a cost to the society. And very, very often, the costs, just like the increased prices in the supermarket, those costs impact the people at the bottom disproportionately. Those costs, Mr. Speaker, and I share this on the day after International Women's Day, those costs impact women more so than men. Because, well, to a higher degree, I should say, because women are those who, unfortunately, society has assigned much of the care work, much of the looking after households work. And so going to the supermarket is something, even though we have to get past that, but women go to the supermarket. Women are the ones who have to decide whether they're gonna buy this, no, I can't buy this, listen to the children crying because you can't get this. There is a disproportionate impact on varying demographics in our society. Those are costs of corruption. As it relates to the third sector, particularly though, the matter of funding for third sector activities, if ever third sector organizations, which are organizations set up ostensibly to focus on various areas of national development, when they get caught up in corruption or corrupt activities, then the vision of the founders of these organizations is derailed. The vision is not realized. And so there are areas of development that go a-begging. The costs of corruption. Funds and resources that are siphoned off for corrupt activities. And the Honourable Member for St. Joseph indicated that it takes two hands. So corruption is never only a police officer. Corruption is never only a politician. Corruption is never only a public officer. Corruption often includes persons in the private sector. And I want to say, and I'm saying this particularly as the minister responsible for labor, resources that are used in corrupt activities are resources that could be better used to remunerate workers, in other words, pay workers a little more. And there are also resources that could be used to expand businesses so that more people can be engaged, can be employed, can find meaningful and decent work to do. These, Mr. Speaker, are all costs of corruption. Costs that I think are too great for a developing country like ours to bear, and so the cost-benefit analysis says to me that we need to invest in structures to root out matters like corruption. I think, Mr. Speaker, that the ultimate cost of corruption is the impact on the ordinary people of a society. There is the matter of the ethical and moral slide that is occasioned by the practice of corruption, so that, for example, a person is led to believe that if I want to pass my driver's test, 16 years old, 17 years old, 18 years old, I want to pass my driver's test. And the father or mother or uncle of my good friend knows that and says to me, well, if you want to pass the test, maybe you should give Mr. X or Miss Y a little something so that you get through. And so young people, and this is just one example, become introduced to corrupt practices at a very early stage. Then we expect those persons moving into the workforce, we expect those persons moving into the church, we expect those persons moving into becoming public officers, we expect those persons who move on to become political leaders, we expect those persons who move on to become civic leaders to act in a responsible way when society has already conditioned them to believe that the way to either get through, as we say in Quarter, or the way to succeed, as you may say in St. Michael Central, or the way to progress is to grease a pan, to give somebody a little something, to turn a blind eye to something. we begin to condition our society in a direction that places a burden on law enforcement down the road, but also creates an environment that becomes toxic to genuine development. And I say, Mr. Speaker, that this bill, as part of the suite of legislation, as part of the journey that this administration is taking, speaks to an absolutely important matter of creating the agency that will focus that will focus on the matter of removing corruption from among us. I would want, on behalf of the people of St. Peter, to congratulate the learned Attorney General for the consultative process that all matters relating to rooting out corruption, that process is taking. It is important to get the views of others. This, just like the selection of persons who will serve, this is not a government matter. This is not a party matter. This is a whole of society issue. This is a matter that we have to approach collectively, so that, as a friend of mine is wont to say, whether the person is in a group at the top of Broad Street or in the middle of Swan Street, all of us are in this together. And for the sake of our nation, we need to focus our minds. We need to focus our resources on rooting this evil from among us. The selection of those persons, I believe, is going to be done in a manner that will speak to independence while not hamstringing the operation of the agency. Often in governance, we have to strike that balance. It is not always easy. There are persons who will find flaws, but I want to commend the process that is encapsulated in this piece of legislation. I think it is an excellent start. And I also want to say, and that is really one of the things I love about this government, if at some point in time down the road, we unearth a better way, this government has demonstrated that it is not afraid to say, we found a better way, and come back to this honorable place to say, this is the amendment that will make what we've started better. And so I want to, while commending this bill to this honorable chamber, also commend it to the public to say that it is a part of the journey, and that while no bill that we've ever brought is perfect, we continue to listen to you, the people. We continue to listen to the organizations that are in concert on the idea of rooting corruption out of our society, and we will continue to build on the platform we've already set to ensure that corruption, its costs, and its negative impact does not pervade and permeate our society, but that we do all that is humanly possible to make sure that the people of this country can live in a free, open, democratic society, free from the weight, free from the burden, free from the cost of corruption. I'm obliged to you.
Honourable Member for St. Joseph.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that this House be suspended for its lunch break at this time, and that we resume at 1:45.
Honorable Chamber be suspended until 1:45 p.m. All those honourable members in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. This honorable chamber stands suspended until 1:45 p.m.